Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video we're going to take a look at a really awesome function that you can use in RPG in a Box called request coordinate. In the next video we'll take a look at the sibling function to this, which is request entity, but just for today we'll focus on request coordinate. So I'm going to cover two things in this video. First of all, I'm going to explain how the function works, and then we'll go over two examples of how to use the function, just so you can get an idea of the ways in which it can be used inside your projects. So to quickly demonstrate this, I'm going to use the in-game console just to demonstrate how request coordinate works. So what we're going to do is we're going to type global.property, and we'll create a global property which we'll call coordinate, something like that. And it can equal request coordinate. And now request coordinate requires 5 parameters in order to work. So the first parameter is the starting height of the selection cursor. Okay, so in this case we'll use 0 because that's the height of my tiles. Okay, put a comma and then a space. The second parameter is how far down, what's the height going down that you're going to allow as the maximum depth. So let's say minus 16, for example, comma, space. The third parameter is how high going up are you going to allow as your maximum. So let's say 16, for example, comma, space. The fourth parameter is when you move up and down in the height, how many steps is it going to take? So for example, if I said 16, then it's going to jump from 0 to 16 straight away, because it goes from 0 to 16. If I set it to 1, then we'd have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'd have to go through all the different steps. If we did it 3, then it would be 3, 6, 9, etc., going up to 16. So let's set it to 1 for the moment. And then the fifth and final parameter is a function name, which will then you can then use to validate the selection. We're going to leave that out for the moment. It's an optional parameter, but when we get to implementing request coordinate in a second, where you'll see two examples of how we use it, you'll get an idea of that function. Okay. For now, let's run this. So what this is going to do is we're basically saying store inside global property coordinate a request coordinate function. So what will happen when we press enter? This green, you can't see it too well because it's on a green tile, but if we go off to the sides where the black is, we can see a green dotted square has now appeared and is attached to our cursor. So wherever we move the cursor, so does that green dotted box. And as we move the cursor around, the engine is basically recording what coordinates we're hovering over as we do so. Okay. So let's go over what the different parameters were that we set here. So 0, the first parameter, is the starting height. So you can see we're at the height of the ground because that's 0. That's what I typed as the first parameter. The next parameter is how far down do we go as a limit. We said minus 16. So if I press S, you can see that the green dotted square goes down, and it will keep going down until it reaches 16. So we're now 16 units below the ground. Okay. The other limit I set was 16, which is the height going up. So if we press W, you can see that eventually we can go up to the top of the wall, but we can't go any higher, okay, because we're now at the height of the wall, which the top of which is 16. Okay, so we're now at the height of the wall. We can't go any higher. Okay, and if we press S, we can go back down. W, we can go back up. Okay, and as soon as we click, the green square goes away, and whatever coordinate we clicked is now stored inside this global property. So if I was to do display message global dot property coord, we can see that we've selected the coordinate 4, -2, 6. So we were at a height of 6 when I clicked. Okay, let's run that command again, but let's make some changes. Let's say we want to start at level 16. We're going to allow a height of -16 going down, and 16 is the maximum height going up. But this time we move in units of 16 at a time. Let's see what that does. So we can see that the cursor starts at the height of the wall, because we said start at 16. That's what the first number is. So we're starting already at a height of 16. We can go down to -16, and we're going to go down in units of 16. So in other words, if I press down, now we're at 0. We're at the ground where the tiles are. If I press S again, now we immediately snap to -16. And if I press W twice, we go to the height of the wall in 2 clicks. Down, up, like so. So let's say I click here and print the message again. We can see that now we're at a height of 16 when I clicked, and that's the coordinate X and Y as well. So we're storing basically inside a global property a coordinate which we've clicked. That's what request coordinate does. It allows the player in game to select a coordinate and have that coordinate be recorded for later use. Let's just quickly go over the properties one more time. Let's make another change. Let's say we start at 0, but we'll set the minimum height to 0, so you can't go any lower than 0, but we'll set the maximum height to, let's say, 32. And we'll go up in increments of, let's say, 5 at a time. Okay, so now, if I just click off the display message, so now you can see I start at 0, but if I press S, I can't go any lower because I've set it so that the minimum is 0, and we're already at 0. So I can't go down any lower than 0. However, I can go higher than 16 this time, so if I press W, I can go higher than the wall, and I can come back down to 0. And notice how I jump in bigger increments because I'm moving in increments of 5. Okay, and again, if I just click, let's say over here, print the message again, you can see the coordinate I clicked was 3, -1, 0. So hopefully that explains how request coordinate itself works. Now let's go into the editor and talk about how do we use this. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show a couple of examples of where we can use, of how we can use request coordinate. So for this demo, we're going to create a simple example where we can place 3 pieces of furniture in a room. And once we've placed those pieces of furniture, then you can't place any more. So it's kind of like a Sims type thing where you can sort of dress up a room a little bit. And these 3 tiles here are going to represent where we can place the 3 pieces of furniture. So I'm going to place this chair, this bench, and this table, and we can pick which one of these tiles we can place it on using request coordinate. Okay. Now I'm going to restrict in this demo the placement of the furniture to these specific tiles here, and that will allow me to demonstrate the 5th parameter, which we haven't got to yet, which is the validate request coordinate process. Okay. So let's get into this. So the first thing I want to do is create a couple of widgets. Now I've already made the widget for this. It's called Furniture, and it's basically 3 buttons with icons. So I've just basically loaded up each model in the voxel editor, took a snapshot of it, and made that the image of the button, and deleted the text that would otherwise have been on the button, and then set that up as the widget. Okay, and it's called Furniture, but the ID is Fern. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to, first of all, in our startup script, we want to create a global property which we're going to use to monitor how many pieces of furniture we've placed. So we want to start the game with a specific amount and then increment that amount as we place furniture until we've placed the maximum amount. So we'll call this global dot property fern placed and it's going to start out 0 because we haven't placed any furniture yet. So at this beginning of the game, this global property is going to be 0. Apply and save that. So now we're going to get to the scripts for our furniture. And there's going to be 3 scripts, 1 per button. Okay, so the first one we'll call place chair, and we'll OK that. Now I'm going to do this in the text code, but at the very end I will quickly show what this looks like in visual code at the end. Okay, but for now I'm going to do this via text just because it's for this kind of thing it's just a lot easier. Okay, so first thing we want to do is, because we're clicking a button on the widget, I would like to hide the widget. So first thing I'm going to do is hide widget, and the widget's ID is fern. So that will get rid of the widget. Then we want to store a request coordinate like we did in the console earlier. But this time it's going to go into a local variable, which I'm going to call result. So $result equals request coordinate, and we're going to have 0 be the starting height. 0 is the minimum depth. I don't want to go any lower than 0. 3 is going to be the maximum height, and we're going to move in increments of 3. So the cursor is literally just going to go from 0 to 3, 0 to 3, 0 to 3 all the time. So it's just a lot easier to select the tiles, the heights that you want. And then the 5th parameter is going to be validate tile. You can name this whatever you want, but this is the function that's going to validate the selection. Okay. Now at the moment this doesn't exist, so we'll need to create this. Okay. But let me first of all explain why I've used free here. If we save this and go back to the map, we can see that there's a raised tile here. Okay. And if we select it, you can see that it's at a height of 3. So I've just used a bit of a difference between the heights of these 3 tiles here, just so I can demonstrate the selection process of moving up and down as part of the selection, if that makes sense. So just having a raised tile just to make this a little bit more interesting, rather than them all being at the same height. Okay. So back to the script. So we need to now write this function that's going to validate our selection, because there's a few things we need to check. We can't just allow any tile. Okay, we need to be a bit smarter than this, because in this case, for a start, we want to restrict the placement of the furniture to those 3 tiles. We don't just want this player to be able to place furniture anywhere. It needs to be on one of those 3 specific tiles. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our function, and we're going to create this inside the same script as the request coordinate. So it's what's called a local function. And you start a function by typing the word function, and that declares a function. Then you need to type the name of the function. So it needs to match what we've typed in here. So we'll call it validate tile. Okay. And then you type begin. And that is how you create a function. And then at the end of the function, you need to have end, so that the code knows that's the end of the function. So everything in between the begin and the end is the code for your function. Okay. Now you can optionally pass in data into a function, which in this case is what we want to do. We want to store the selected coordinate, and we want to manipulate that data. We want to check it, make sure it contains the things we want. So selected will now allow us to check the coordinates as we move the cursor around. Okay, that's what selected is going to contain. It's going to contain the coordinates as we move the cursor around the map. So what we want to do first of all is we want to check if tile. Now the tile function requires that the coordinates actually be broken up into x, y, z. So you can't just, for example, you can't just pass in the coordinates like that and be done with it. So we need to break it up into .x, $selected, $y, $selected, $z. Okay? And what we want to check here is null, then return false, end. What we're saying there is if the tile at these coordinates is empty, in other words, if you're hovering over black empty space, then it shouldn't be allowed. So return false, which basically means that you're not going to be allowed to click on that specific coordinate. Okay, in game it's going to show as a red dotted square, meaning you can't actually, it's not an allowed coordinate. Okay. What we also want to check is whether, and I'm going to do this by copying this just because it's easier. What we also want to check is if there's already something on a tile. So the first check is there even a tile? Because there should be. And then if there is a tile, is it preoccupied? Is there something already on the tile? So in this case, we're going to say if tile selected X, Y, and Z dot object not equal to null. So in other words, if there is an object already on that tile, return false, end. And then we'll copy this because we're going to make an exact copy of this. But this time, instead of objects, we're going to check for characters. So if there's an NPC on a tile, then again, that shouldn't be allowed either. So if a tile has anything on it other than just the tile itself, then it's not allowed. And likewise, the tile has to be a tile. It can't just be empty, vacant space. If that's the case, the last thing we want to check is we want to make sure that it is one of those free red tiles. So we do that by creating another local variable, which we'll call valid tiles. And that's going to be an array. And inside the array are going to be free coordinate arrays. So let me just prepare those. And then inside here, we're going to put the coordinates to those free red tiles. So it's a good job that I made a record of them. So let me just write these down. So it's -4, -4, 0 for the first one. The other one is -1, -4, 3 for the height. And then the last one is 3, -4, 0. Okay? So those are the coordinates for the free tiles, the free red tiles that we have in the map. And then if we are hovering over those, then we allow it, and we do that by saying return valid tiles contains $selected. What we're basically saying in there is allow it if our selection contains, or should I say, if this array here contains our selection. So if we're hovering over one of these, then it's going to be allowed. Otherwise, it would again return false. So that's our function. Okay, so this function here, validate tile, is just checking before we request coordinate and store it into this result. It's going to check these things are valid first. So we have to be hovering over an existing tile. That tile should be empty of objects and empty of characters, and it should also be one of these free coordinates. Okay. If that's the case, if it passes all of this, when we click, our coordinate, which we're hovering over, will get stored in $result. So what do we want to do? Once we've clicked, we want to add object. And in this case, we want to add the model. Now, just to show you that, it's the model name. So here, chair 04. And where do we want to place it? Well, $result, because that has the coordinates we've recorded. That's why we've recorded them, so we can use it. And then the ID that we're going to give, in this case, the chair. And I'm just going to call it chair 1. The next thing we want to do is make sure the chair, when it's placed, is facing the right direction. We don't want it facing towards the wall or anything like that, because that would be silly. So we want it to be facing towards the player if they're looking in this direction. So because the camera is currently facing north, that means we want the chair facing south. So going back to the script, what we're going to do is we're going to type entity chair 1 dot direction equals south. So that will make the chair face the right way. And then what we want to do as well is we want to remove the navigation. So I'm going to type replace navigation. We want to remove the navigation that leads to the tile that we've placed this object on. So replace navigation chair 1. We want to replace walk and interact with none. So it clears away the navigation. Then what we want to do is I want to hide the button on the widget now, because I'm going to make it so that there's only one chair, one bench and one table that you can place. Once you've placed each one, each button disappears from the widget so you can't click it again. Obviously if you wanted multiple chairs, then you wouldn't hide the button so that each time you click it, it will basically redo this every single time, but for a different coordinate. But for now, I'm going to hide the button. So widget fern dot element 0001, which is the ID of the button, dot visible equals false. So that will now hide the button. And then the last thing we want to do is global property fern placed plus equals 1. So it increments that property that we have in our startup script. We're incrementing that by 1 each time we place a piece of furniture. So eventually it will equal 3 because that's how many pieces of furniture we have. So let's apply and save, check that's valid code. Okay, and that's saved fine. So now what we're going to do is we're going to basically reuse this script for the other two pieces of furniture. So I'm just going to click Save As, and this is going to be place bench. Check that we're editing the bench one. Going to click Edit, and we don't need to change any of this. This is all fine because the function's still going to be the same checks and everything. All we want to do is change what object we're adding. So the model for this is called park_bench. It goes at $result wherever we've clicked. We'll give it the ID of bench 1. And then bench 1 needs to be rotated to face south. We need to remove the navigation on the tile where we place bench 1. And then the button for bench needs to disappear, which is button 2, element 2. Other than that, the property gets incremented as well. So again, we'll save that. And then the last one, we'll click Save As, and this is place table. Again, just check this is place table before you click Edit. This is all fine, so we just want to change the model to table. The ID can be table 1, and the entity table 1 needs to face south. And we want to remove the navigation to the tile that has table 1 on it and remove button 3. Okay, make it invisible. And click Apply and Save. And that's the 3 scripts done. That's the bulk of the work done for our furniture placing system. Really, I'd say for this, if you're following this, stick to the text. It's just a lot easier. But if you want to afterwards look at the nodes for yourself and just see what each one is and how it's built visually, then you can do so. But obviously it does look a bit complicated when you look at it afterwards, but you know. But anyway, so let's move on now. So there's one more script I need to make, and this is going to be called show fern. And this is going to be how we show our widget. So for this, I'm going to click Edit, and we're just going to have a simple if condition here, which is if global.property fern placed, if it's equal to 3, then we want to display message no more furniture left, something like that. Else show widget fern end. So that's our very small script that's just going to check the status of this global property. Okay, and this script is going to go into game configuration, hot key bindings, hotkeys, add a key bind. I'm going to press L, that's going to be the key. It's going to run script show fern. So every time I press L, it's going to check how many furniture we've placed, and if we haven't placed them all yet, show the widget. If we have, say that we've got no more furniture left. And that's other than going back to our widget and assigning the free scripts. So we need to select this button. This needs to be place chair. This one needs to be place bench. And this one needs to be place table. It's automatically assigned them for me because I'm using the same names that they already had before. But obviously you would need to actually select each one. So, and then save that. And then let's test again. So here we are in the game. I'm going to bring the console down. I'm going to type nav on, just so we can see the navigation lines. I'm also going to print global.property fern placed, just so we can see that it starts out at 0. So because it's 0, if I press L, up comes my furniture widget. I can click any one of these. Let's click the chair. It becomes a red square because first of all, none of these tiles are valid because there aren't any tiles. Remember, the function is checking for, first of all, are there any tiles? Well, this would be invalid because there aren't any. This would be valid for that because there are tiles here, but it's not one of these free red tiles. This would obviously have a character on it, so that wouldn't be valid either. But as soon as I hover over one of these red tiles, it goes green. Yeah, that one remains red. We'll get to that in a second. But if I go over to this one, that also goes green. This one I'm at the wrong height, so if I press W, I go up, and now that becomes green because now I'm at a height of 3. Okay, but this would be invalid because I'm at a height of 3, but there's no tile there, so it's not valid. Okay, so let's place the chair in the middle here. So if I click, the chair gets placed. It's facing south, and the line, the connecting the grid to the tile that the chair is on has been removed. If we print the global property, it's gone up by 1, so we've placed one piece of furniture. If I press L, the button has gone. Let's place the table next, just so we're out of order. Let's place the table over here. So if I click again, it goes green there, red otherwise, green there. Now, if I press W here and I go up, notice this is now red instead of green. It was green earlier. Why is it red? It's red because we're also checking that there can't be any objects on a coordinate either. So because the chair is now occupying this tile, this coordinate is now invalid. Okay, but we can place it here. That places the table, disconnects the line, rotates it facing south. If we print the property, it's gone up to 2. L, now the table button is missing. So finally, if we click the bench, we can place the bench only in one place now. Over here, click, the bench is placed, face south, deleting the nav, print the property, it's now at 3. So because I have a script on L, where if it equals 3, do something different to showing the widget, when I press L now, it says no more furniture left. Okay, so that's just a very simple implementation of request coordinate, in this case placing 3 pieces of furniture. Now if we just quickly go back to the script for a second, obviously the most complicated looking part of the whole process is let's just open up the chair script, is the function, because obviously we've got all of this sort of XYZ stuff going on. But really all it is, and hopefully I've explained it as I was typing it out, you can see what it's trying to do, and hopefully by understanding it, it makes sense. We're just checking for in this case, is there a tile there? You know, if it's null, then don't allow it. If there's an object, if there is an object on there, don't allow it. If there is a character on there, don't allow it. And as long as it's one of these three coordinates, also allow it. Otherwise, nothing else can be allowed. And then once we click, we store it in result, and then we're adding the object to the result, so adding the object to that location. We're then rotating that object, removing the navigation from that object, and then removing the button and incrementing the property. So the rest of this code should be fairly straightforward if you've done any Boxsite code before of any degree. The function, although might initially be a bit confusing if you're sort of starting out with Boxsite, hopefully explaining it as I typed it out did help. Now let's try something different. Let's amend the code a bit and let's comment out this restriction. So instead of limiting it to those 3 tiles, let's remove that and change this to return true, which is how you have to do this, because this is how you then allow, because if it's none of these, then return true. Basically, you have to return it somehow, otherwise it won't be a valid function. It won't ever be, you won't ever have a valid tile if you don't say return true. So let's now give that a test. Now we've only put it on the place chair, so we'll just test it with the chair. So if we run the game again, and we put nav on, okay, so here's the navigation. If I press L and we click the chair, now we can see that we can place the chair anywhere. Okay, we could place it up here, we could place it there, there. The only place we can't place it is here, because there's no tiles here, and here because there's a character. Those restrictions are still in place, but we've not restricted it to these red tiles anymore, so we can place the chair anywhere we want. So let's place the chair there, and it marks out the navigation so we can walk around it, and places the chair facing south. Okay, and would also increment the property and all of that. So let's take another quick look at another example of how we can use request coordinate. Okay, so as I said, I thought I'd show another example, because I think if I show at least 2, and this one's going to be sort of almost the opposite validation than the previous one, it should just help sink in a bit more how this works, if you can see 2 examples of it rather than just 1. So this is going to be a very different scenario. So we've got 2 rooms here and a 4-tile gap in between, which we're going to allow the player in the game to be able to build a bridge across to the other room. Okay, now this is going to be complicated for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're dealing with negative space, there's nothing here, but also once we've built the bridge, we're going to need to be able to walk across it. Okay, but let's solve the first problem first. We've got this negative space here, we can't physically reach the other room. How are we going to do this? So let's change the startup script. We're going to need a couple of extra global properties. We're not really going to use furniture anymore, but I'll leave it there for now. We're going to click Edit, Full Screen. So we're going to need a global property for our inventory. So let's say we call this bridge, well, let's call it planks. Makes more sense, right? So we have a total of 4 planks at the beginning of the game, okay, and we can use those planks to build a bridge, okay, but once we've placed all the planks, then that's it, we've run out of planks. We also want to store something which I'm going to call plank ID, because we're going to assign an ID to each plank as we place it. So at the beginning, it's going to start out 0, but as we increment through, it's going to go up by 1 each time. And it will allow us to assign each plank a unique ID. So those are our 2 global properties which we need for this particular implementation. Let's now create the script for our bridge. So we'll call this build bridge. Okay. And let's go full screen into the code again. And again, I'm going to do this by the code just because I find it a lot easier than using the nodes. But if you follow along, and if you're following along with this video, then write out the code, and then if you'd rather look at it in the visual nodes afterwards, feel free to do so and see how it's been built. So what we want to do is first of all create our function. Okay, this is going to be the function that's going to be the fifth parameter for our request coordinate. So I'm going to call this validate coordinate, because we're not validating a tile this time, so I'm going to call it something different. Validate coordinate begin end, and we're going to pass in $selected again. Seems a good name to use for it. So you can call this whatever you want, but I'm going to, just for now, just so I don't confuse myself, I'm going to use the same name. So the first thing we want to check is the opposite of what we checked in the previous example. We want if tile $selected.x, $selected.y, $selected.z. If the tile is not equal to null, then return false. Because in this case, we do want there to be empty space. So if there is a tile there, shouldn't be allowed. We can't place a tile on top of another tile. So what we're saying here is if our coordinates is not empty, then don't allow it. Okay? And then we want to make sure that we're only placing the bridge on that 4 tile empty negative space in between the 2 rooms. We don't want to be able to place the bridge anywhere else. So we're going to restrict it to those 4 tiles, just like we did in the previous example where we restricted the furniture to those 3 red squares. But this time it's going to be those 4 vacant tiles in between the 2 rooms. So this is going to be another array. But because there's 4 tiles in between the 4 rooms, we need, in between the 2 rooms, we need 4 coordinates in this array. So let me just prepare those. And again, I've pre-noted them down. So the first one is -2, -16, 0. The next one is -2, -17, 0. The next one is -2, -18, 0. And the last one is -2, -19, 0. So there's our valid coordinates, and we will return $valid coordinates contains $selected. So if our selection is one of those 4, allow that to go through. Okay. So now we're going to do $result, and we're going to store inside $result request coordinate. And this time we're going to start at level 0, because that's the level where the floor is at. We're not going to go down because there's, I've got no need to build a bridge lower than 0. We're not going to go up because I've got no need for building a bridge any higher. And for that reason, I don't need to move at all. So I'm going to leave the movement increment number at 0 as well. But then we need to pass in our function validate coord. So that will check that we're over a valid tile, and if we are, when we click, it gets stored in $result. So the first thing we want to do is, before we place our plank, we want to increment plank ID, because it starts at 0, okay? But what I want to do is make the first plank start at 1. So before we place it, I'm going to increment plank ID by 1. So the first time it will become 1. Okay. Then what we want to do is we want to type add tile, because we're adding a tile, not an object. The name of the model, in this case for me it's bridge. That's what I called the model that we're going to use. Where is it going to be placed? Well, $result, because that has the coordinates we've clicked. And then the ID. So for this, I'm going to call it plank, and then I'm going to use placeholder expression. So for that, it's dollar, open and close squiggly brackets, and inside the squiggly brackets, we're going to type global dot property, open and close square brackets. And because we would normally put speech marks in here, which is going to break the code in this case, you need to put backslashes before both speech marks, and then this is going to be plank underscore ID. Okay, so this is basically going to become plank 1 the first time, plank 2 the second time, automatically as we go through, because this will increment and then get stored alongside the name as the ID. So this will be plank 1, plank 2, plank 3, etc. Then what we want to do is we want to grab the entity, in this case the tile. So we'll just copy this, it makes life a lot easier. And we want to make it face, in my case, west. I've pre-tested this. I know that west is the direction I need the tile to be rotated so that it looks correct. Then what we need to do is we need to decrease the amount of planks we have in our inventory. So global property planks, take away 1. So minus equals 1. Okay? And for now, there's one more thing I'm going to do. If global dot property planks is less than or equal 0, so if there's 0 or somehow less than 0 planks, then what we're going to do is hide widget planks. Okay, and that is our script done. So I'll save that and check it's valid. Okay, and then we just need one more script, which I'm going to call show planks. Oops. And this is going to be very simply if global dot property planks is greater than 0, so if you've still got some planks you can place, then show widget planks. This is so if you somehow close the widget before you finish placing them, this is how you can initially show it, but also show it again if you somehow close it. Okay, and apply. So because we're being able to place more than one plank in this case, I'm not going to hide the widget until you've placed all of them. Okay, and then this script, show planks, needs to go into game configuration, and instead of show furniture, show planks. So that shows the right widget when we press L. And then the last thing we need to do is just go back to our planks widget and make sure the button is linked up to place or build bridge. Okay, so let's save this. Just quickly go over the script one more time just so you can see it. Build bridge. So what we're basically saying is function validate selected, and if the tile is not empty, then don't allow it. If it's not one of these 4 coordinates, don't allow it, otherwise do allow it to go through on these coordinates. And if it's valid, when you click, store where you've clicked in $result. Increment the plank ID by 1 each time we do this. Add tile bridge to the location, give it an ID, rotate the entity with that ID, so the tile with that ID so it's facing the right way. Decrease, take 1 away from our available planks, and when that available planks reaches less than or equal to 0, hide the widget. Okay, so let's test this out. So here we are in the game, there's our gap. Let's press L. We got our plank, so we can click here and notice we've got our request coordinate cursor. However, we can't place here because there's tiles here, okay? But we also can't place here because although it would be valid, i.e. there's no tiles, it's not any one of these four. And these are green, only these are green, everything else is red, okay? So let's click here. It places the plank down, and the planks number should have gone from 4 to 3. Let's click this, place the next one, let's say there. That should now have gone from planks to 2. This should, when I click, planks should now be 1. And so when I place the final piece, the widget should disappear. Okay, and there we go, we've built our bridge. There's just one problem, however. If we turn the nav on, the rooms are still disconnected. Yeah, there's no way for me to get to the other room, even though I've built the physical bridge. I can't get across. So we need to deal with that next. And this is sort of the next level of complexity we have when it comes to dynamically changing the map itself. So in order to do this, the simplest way I'm going to do this is do it after the whole bridge has been built. So I'm actually going to place, this bit of code in the if planks less than or equal to 0 bit. So in other words, when the whole bridge has been constructed, okay? What I need to do first, however, is when we add a tile and rotate it, what I want to add is another command. Add to group. And what I want to do is add the plank that we've just added each time. So it has the plank plus the ID, and that's going to go in a group which I'm going to call the bridge, let's say. Okay, so that's our group name. So once we've finished building the bridge, there'll be 4 tiles inside this group. Okay. If global property planks is less than or equal to 0, in other words, if we've placed all of the planks, there's none in our inventory anymore, they're all out in the map, we want to for loop through the group. So for $, we can call this whatever we want, just for ease of use, I'm going to say I. For $I in group, the bridge, do, and then end. So we're going to for loop through every plank in the bridge group, okay? And what we want to do is $forward tile is going to equal tile $I, which is the current tile, .x, $I.y plus 1, so that's going to be forward 1 from the current tile's position, $I plus .z, okay? That's going to be forward tiles tile. Then back tile is going to be tile $I.x, $I.y minus 1, so we're going back 1 from the position of the tile that we're currently on, $I.z. So we've now got these forward and backward tile for each tile as we loop through the group, okay? And then as we loop through the group, we're going to do modify navigation, and we're going to say $I is our first tile, $forward tile is our second tile, oops, that needs to have an underscore, and we want to connect them up, so walk and interact, okay? And then we want to modify, let's just copy this, it's easier. We want to modify navigation between I and back tile as well. So in other words, what we're doing is we're looping through every plank in the bridge group, which will be all 4 of them, and for every plank in the group, we're storing the tile in front of that plank, the tile behind that plank, and then we're modifying the navigation so that the plank we're currently on and the plank in front of it get connected, and then the plank we're currently on and the plank behind it get connected, and it will just loop through the whole group doing that. So let's apply and save, and now we should see that when we place the bridge and it's finished, it should also build the navigation as well. Okay, and we can now test this out. So if I turn nav on, so we can see the grid. So at the moment we can see there's no connection between the two rooms. If I press L, brings up the widget. If I place the first plank, let's rotate this. If I place the first plank, nothing happens. If I place the second plank, nothing happens because I'm waiting until the bridge has been finished. Next plank. And then as soon as I place this piece, because the parts will be equal to 0, this widget will hide, and then it should just loop through all the bridge tiles and connect them all up to the tile in front and the tile behind. And it builds our navigation, and now we can walk across to the other side. So there you go. So there's another quick example use of request coordinate. And again, we can go back to the script and we could remove this restriction and return true. This would obviously mess up a bit because we're now, I mean, they would connect if they were in a straight line, but it would error if we're, well, we can try it, I guess. Let's see what happens. But this is just to show that, you know, if we remove this, we can place the planks anywhere. But obviously, in the case of this example, I didn't want to do that. But just to show you that you can, if we comment this out and quickly run the game again. Let's turn the nav on again. And walk over to this corner, press L. Now we can place this wherever there's not a tile. Okay, so these are not valid, but these are, but also anywhere. So we could click here. We could also place one here. We could place one here. We could place one here. And yeah, so there's a bit of an error there because of how I was placing them. But if we restarted the game, let's do it again. I think the problem is, I think I know it's probably still going to error. Let me just nav on again. I think I know why it would still error. Let me just verify. So click, 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 click. Yeah, even in a straight line, it's going to error because there are no, because what I'm doing here is I'm also taking into consideration these tiles here. The first of this one and the first of this one is either the forward or back tile of the last bridge piece, if you get what I mean. But in this case, there isn't a tile at the end of this one and at the end of this one. So that's why it's always going to error. But, you know, that's just a case of changing the code for how you validate or how you loop through and connect the bridge up. So there you go. So there's a video on request coordinate. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on the Discord. Hopefully this video has been interesting and entertaining and shed some light on this function and how to use it. The next video, as I say, will be on request entity, which is kind of the sibling to this, but a little simpler to use because we're not having to deal with coordinates when you deal with specific entities. And there's some cool things you can do with request entity as well. So stay tuned for that. But for now, that will wrap up this video. Thanks for watching.